I was thinking about, we do a lot more reading the scriptures on Sunday night than we do anything else. But you know what? That's in the Old Testament. That's what they used to do. And in the synagogue, they would read these scriptures, for hours. And there was some interaction, with what was going on. But that was the main thing they did. They read the scriptures. I think it's a good thing. Chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. Chapter 4, and something you might have picked up on. I'm going to tell you, this was a rough time to live back then. Not to mention, your daily getting of food and all that kind of stuff, which was always, it was always tough. But I mean, you had all these different leaders and all that, and wars and murderers, just like we read about the murder of Abner by Joab. And there was killings and murders and all kinds of stuff going on. I don't know if I'd wanted to be king of the Israelites back then, but that was the place David had come into after all these years. But his son Ishbosheth, Saul's son Ishbosheth, he was still, considered the king. But although they were kind of in a civil war here at this time. So in chapter 4, it says, when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. So if you remember now, you saw back before, Abner had got very angry with Ishbosheth because Abner had taken one of Ishbosheth's father, who was Saul, had taken one of his concubines, and his son, rightly so, didn't think that was right, not according to them, the way they lived back then. And so Abner got mad with him and just went to David. So he had feared Abner, but now it says his courage failed. Somebody had taken that bully that was bullying him and killed him. So now he was in fear of his life. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab. Sons of Rimmon, a man of Benjamin from Beeroth. It says, verse 4, it says, Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. Y'all remember Jonathan, don't you? That was David's best friend. He was 5 years old when the news came about Saul and Jonathan. When the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, where they were killed. And his nurse took him up and fled, and as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest, just like some of us did today. And they came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. When they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. Then they took his head and went by way of the Arabah, which was the desert, all night, and brought the head to Ishbosheth, to David at Hebron. Well, I'll tell you what, like I say, these are some nice folks right here. You can count on them and trust them. And they said to the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and on his offspring. But David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of the hand of every adversity, when one told me, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they killed them, and cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. Y'all ain't noticed right yet, David is cut from a different cloth from everybody else around him. He got a greater sense of justice, and he knows, and he loves the Lord. He's faithful to the Lord, which a lot of them ain't. They're out how they can increase their own power. That's the thing. And David really wasn't one to seek power, but the Lord ordained for him to have it. And even though all these years he could have taken Saul and killed him, he didn't do it. And now he revenged Saul's death, and now he's revenged his son's death. So that should pour cold water on all these folks trying to gain favor by killing what he called his adversaries, I would say. All right, chapter 5. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be a prince over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So the civil war was over. The whole nation had gathered around David now, and he was finally coming into his own. It took years and years and years, but he is finally coming into his own as king. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. At Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. So if it took him 15 years to get anointed a king, and he's 30 years old here, that means when he killed Goliath, he was 15. You know, he was just a very, very young man when he killed Goliath, and that's when Samuel had anointed him as king over Israel. The one that was out looking after the sheep, he wasn't even home. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. You know, they didn't even have Jerusalem at this time. It was occupied by another people. And they said to David, you will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off, thinking David cannot come in here. In other words, they thought they pretty much had an impregnable city and nobody could get into it. And David didn't have the power to do it. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. And David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind. He's being sarcastic there. Who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it said, the blind and the lame shall not come into this house. So what they did, they went up through the water tunnels that supplied water for the city. That's how they came into the city and attacked it and took it. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the Millo inward. That's one of the biggest and oldest walls there, that Millo. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. So here now, you can see David is coming into his own finally, after all these years. And it says, and Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, also carpenters and masons, who built David a house. And David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. Just understand that David had wisdom that came from God, and he understood that the position that he had been given to him by the Lord. And even though he was king, he was still humble, but he was not without his mistakes in life, just like all of us are, as humble before the Lord and honest before the Lord as we can be. We just always got to keep in mind we ain't but one step away from failure. I mean, by turning from God. And this is what makes me say that. Verse 13. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nephi, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. Easy names, just yeah. So you see right here, you know why he may have all these concubines, because that's how they did things back then. If they tried to make peace treaties with the countries around them, the king would marry some of the other king's daughters, or vice versa, and they get intermingled like that. That's not what the Lord wanted, though. That is not what he wanted at all. But they did it anyway. David did it. His son did it. Even big time. Solomon did it just outrageously. That's right. But that's how they did things back then. Yeah, Solomon. But David had his fair share. So and then it said in verse 17, when the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? Do you remember how, when David asked these questions, how he came about getting his answer? He had the priest with him. And the priest had that the Urim and the Thummim, which, you ask these guys, these theologians about it, a lot of them ain't really sure how that works, but they had the priest had a breastplate on with all these jewels. And somehow they got an answer from that, but nobody really knows for sure, how they got that answer. But that's how the Lord spoke. But so he asked the Lord, will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal-perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord had broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. Therefore the name of that place is called Baal-perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, you shall not go up. Go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. And David did as the Lord commanded him, and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. So God has given David, he's not only given him the throne now, but he's destroying all his enemies around him. God is establishing his kingdom, not David's kingdom, but he's establishing his kingdom with Israel here. Now this one right here, this is an interesting chapter here, chapter 6. And we'll get through that and finish with that. But has anybody got anything they want to say before we go forward with this? Something they noticed? You noticed?
Just can't imagine all the bloodshed.
Now, that was a rough time to live.
Hand-to-hand combat, bow and arrows.
Yeah. Yeah. It was rough back then. Yeah. I mean, it was rough. You couldn't just live in peace. I mean, there was always something going on. And it says, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal, Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. As they brought this thing to Jerusalem, they were just, cymbals. Yeah, Terry was out there with cymbals, banging them together. This was a time of rejoicing. This ark had been hid out for all this time, basically, and now it was being carried into Jerusalem. And they were all really celebrating at this time. And dancing and singing. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error. And he died there before the Lord. You know, I used to not understand what the deal was here, and you know, you kind of, come on, God, these people were celebrating you. They were rejoicing. What's the problem here? They were doing it wrong. And they should have known better. They were hauling it with cattle. And its priest was supposed to be bearing it on their shoulders. You know, and they knew that. That's written in the law of Moses, how it's supposed to be transported. This is how far behind these people had gotten from the Lord. They didn't even realize it. And it also said David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. So even David got mad. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day, which means breaking out against Uzzah. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. See, this guy was not even an Israelite, but the place went into his house. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. So while that thing sat there in his home, or in his place, he was getting a blessing from God. Verse 12, it says, and it was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. David said, we're going to get some of that blessing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. You see what's happened here? When those that bore the ark of the Lord they sit down and figured out what they went back and understood, we're not doing this right. We shouldn't have been using cattle to haul it in here. That's not how we're supposed to do it. And so every time the people who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. He was just wearing a loose linen outfit there. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of the horn. This is the interesting part right here. David and Michal. Y'all remember her? As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. This is his wife now. This was his first wife that wound up being given by her father Saul to somebody else. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. So he sent them all home where they weren't hungry. Gave them bread and meat and raisins. They were all glad to get that too. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David. So Michal, she turned out to be the turd in the punch bowl. Excuse me. But
We got no video.
But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." Now, some people say this means he was naked. He was not. He had on that linen ephod. It was probably pretty sheer and all that, but I mean, it had to be loose because he was dancing, it said, with all his might before the Lord as they were bringing it in. He was worshiping God. And his wife saw him out the window. She wasn't involved in all this worshiping. And all she could do was find fault with him.
Tommy has 700 other wives, I might.
Yeah. You reckon? And David said, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father." Remember, this was Saul's daughter. "And above all his house, to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord." Y'all remember that TV show where Walter Brennan used to say, "No brag, just facts"? I mean, it's way back in the past. But that's what he'd say when he talked about his abilities. He'd say, "No brag, just facts." And it was true. I mean, he could really do it. But this is what David's doing right here. He's not bragging about his position. He's just telling it like it is. The Lord put me in this position over your father and over your family. He said, "That's where I'm at now." He said, "To appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord." He said, "I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. So he pretty much just put her aside You saw where she stood, and that's how it was. Ma'am?
Wouldn't have lasted long.
Yeah,
Because the water, her life wasn't taken.
Yeah.
It would have been stoned right away. She blasted him.
yeah. It was a rough time, but David, he made a lot of mistakes in his life and failed a lot. But this time right here, he was not telling a lie. The Lord had handed him that kingdom, and he was worshiping the Lord, and she didn't like his particular style of worship because he was dancing out there in the streets. And she said all these servant girls, they were just really enjoying all that carrying on. And he said, it don't matter to me, I'm going to worship the Lord. He said, if they enjoy watching me worship, that's fine. He said, but as for you, me and you are done. We in the same house, but we're done. And that wound that up. So, a lot of drama, a lot of Young and the Restless type stuff going on here. But David, as you see right here, he was going to worship the Lord no matter what. That's what he intended to do, and he was going to keep doing it. God blessed him. God blessed him greatly. Y'all got anything else you thinking about here?
Just wonder what was going through her head about her father.
Yeah,
Hadn't been too long he'd been killed.
yeah,
She'd been given to another guy, his wife, back today.
Yeah.
She probably felt like,
Driver what?
yeah, piece of material or something to be traded back and forth.
yep. You remember the time before when they were married, she kind of stuck up for David one time, and then she kind of, when they sent somebody to come and kill David, remember, she kind of threw him under the bus, and said he threatened me, and all this.
Shows you how much we need the Lord.
Oh, absolutely.
Because even King David ain't gonna save you.
Oh, yeah.
The Lord is gonna save you.
That's right. That's right. Like I said, like we talked about, that was some hard living back then. It didn't matter whether you was a king or not. It was still hard living. But they're trying to get there. The Lord's still blessing them. As we'll see next time, it says that God establishes his covenant with David.
Still how much more blessed we are in the New Testament with the Holy Spirit inside of us.
Yes.
That's right.
He didn't die if we'll slow down and listen to what they did.
Oh, absolutely.
What they had was just forget what they could remember, what the word was, and nothing to stir them back up.
There's a lot of difference. Now, see, you think, well, that's really cool. He's getting the word of the Lord from the priest there, telling him what he should do and what he shouldn't do. But that's not the Holy Spirit moving in your heart, telling you what to do. That's not the same thing. And they couldn't have that back then. That was, before the time of Jesus. The Holy Spirit would move on somebody, but he wouldn't indwell their hearts. Anybody got anything else?
If we could just grab a hold of the fact that, no matter what's going on around us, about us, in the world, that every promise God has made to us in the Bible is there for us to claim.
That's right.
And we can live that, we can think that, and it can change our thinking. And we can have joy in the Lord, and our strength is in the joy of the Lord.
Absolutely.
If we can just grab that and walk in it and live that, and, not go down in these 8-week pity parties.
Oh, yeah. be so much better. Life would be so much,
Claim the promises.
yeah.
What do you got to do to get there?
I don't know.
65.
I'll remind you that next time.
Yeah, I'll let you remind her. I ain't gonna do it. But I know, yeah, I mean, you just look at all these people, what they were going through.
Maybe you're a faster learner than she is.
Yeah, I'm a slow learner. That's why I wouldn't have made it back then. That's why God had me be born with David's time.
You don't want to be stoned.
I would have been stoned. No doubt. I just said it's finished. My testimony's over.
Well,
That song we sang at 10,000 Reasons.
Yes, that's right.
We got so many reasons
That's what I was
to
thinking.
thank God and praise God.
Yes, sir.
It's hard to wrap your mind around Jeff Davis because it's so different. You know, when you talk about the storm this morning, you know, how God's very
Yes.
I don't know how we would have handled another.
God's been
You know,
merciful
it's just
to
by,
us.
like I said, we're lucky. Ain't no luck to it.
No.
It's by the grace of God.
God
I mean,
had
think
grace.
it come this way just as easy as if it's that way.
that's right.
We don't praise Him enough.
Amen. Preach.
He's either in control or he's not.
That's right.